Sure.
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Right. So I think that we are ready. Let me start the recording. Well, we can do the two recordings. No, you are doing in your computer, I'm doing in this computer. Yeah,
Good, good. Redundancy is a good idea.
exactly.
I didn't know
Right.
that was possible with Zoom.
Yeah, I think that it is possible. So anyway, thank you very much, Pille, to be with us. As you can see, there is a lot of interest in your talk. And we have a large variety of people here, not only from the Metaphorum, but we have Gerald Mijle has also extended the invitation to people from the Center of System Studies. So we have some visitors from the Center of System Studies. And anyway, very, very nice to have you here. I think that the topic and the way you deal with the topic is of huge interest for many of us, most of us. So it's all yours. Please.
Okay.
Please.
So that's kind of intimidating to have all this
No,
interest.
That wasn't
But,
my intention.
I know. So I will share my screen
Yes, please. Yes.
here. And then start to push the play button so you can see the presentation form. So I've been asked to talk about language as an enabling constraint. Enabling constraints are really neat. They're useful. Like I couldn't walk without the constraint of gravity keeping me to the earth, or my walking would not be possible. And so language makes many things possible, and it constrains other kinds of behavior. And what the topic here should be, oh, I forgot to turn the video. I don't know how well the videos come across, but it's on Zoom. But the topic here is for viability. Now, viability is a complex notion, though it seems so simple. Yet I am going to just allude to it here and there. I think perhaps this group has been discussing viability more than what I will be able to. And as I put in the subtitle, I did some of this presentation back in last summer at the ISSS meeting. So there's going to be some redundancy and some new ideas. And I've always indebted to many conversations with many of you, or some of you at least, over the decades. It's been a lot of experience that goes into this. And of course, I have an indebtedness to my mentor, Umberto Maturana. One of the things he said, is that every regularity reveals, every distinction reveals a regularity in experience and obscures others. And that is the basic thing that I've learned to think about and use. One of the simple examples of it is I'm looking at a piece of the moor. This was on a walk with Gerald Minkley some years ago. And you see, oh, there's lots of things, lichens and mosses, and oh, look, there's rabbit pellets. And as you start to focus on the rabbit pellets, you made a distinction and other things kind of fade into the background. So that distinction has obscured the others. But this is a physical distinction, and we're used to making those. What we also do is make these distinctions and ideas, and each one we make reveals some regularity in our experience and obscures others. It's what obscures that remains invisible to us largely, especially when reference are an intangible and we treat them as things, as if information was a thing or reality was a thing. Then we really have kind of closed the door too much. So I'm going to do this in a series of topics, and I'm going to pause, if I remember, for each new one. So I'll start with chunking and betweens, and this is kind of where I get my toes in the water. And I'll explain what I mean by chunking and the betweens. Starts with a story. And could just somebody speak and say whether everything is okay with this?
Everything's good.
Okay, good. Because I can't see you. I'm not sure what's come. It starts with a story. Some years ago, I visited Estonia, and that's my country of birth and my first language. And I saw this little kid climbing up some concrete stairs. He was under 2, and I asked the parents, "Aren't you afraid that he'll fall?" "Oh, no, he's doubly. He's down doubly." And I said, "Oh, yeah, it's okay." And then I got talking to them and said, "Well, doubly as a concept that doesn't exist in English. I can't explain it. And her response was, well, how on earth do you raise kids then? I got thinking about that, and that started a whole chain of further thoughts. And now this is my granddaughter. I'm using some of these Estonian words with her that don't exist in English. Dubli, virk, and tragi. And they all have to do with different ways of distinguishing experiences and language. And these don't happen in English, and they're different. So I look at, what does tragi mean? How would they translate to English? Well, it could be kind of brisk, could be kind of smart, but it's not really either, though it has elements of both. And if I then look at brisk and try and translate to Estonian, it's kind of kärmas, kind of vilgas, elavu terga, elav tatu terguta, but none of them is quite brisk. And you can do this with any of these words. You keep finding that you get a constellation where the languages don't quite find exactly the same meanings out of it, possibilities. So there's some things that between different languages chunk our experience differently. And this is especially so with non-tangible things. So what is important here is the meanings already in English. There are some that are invisible to Estonian. Similarly, as the meanings of traki in Estonian, you get to the fringes of it, so you can kind of point to it, a bit of brisk, a bit of smart, a bit of lively, but you can't really get the central thing unless you've lived in that language, lived in that culture. There are betweens in which each language distinguishes, which is another way of saying that every distinction reveals a regularity in our experience and obscures others. It's these others that I think of as the betweens, and they only become visible when you happen to be able to have two ways of thinking about it, or more than ways. So, any questions for that section? Or comments? Okay.
Well, I would like to make a comment. I find it really inspirational the way that you are putting it, because it makes me think of the way that Raúl Espejo has always referred, when we talk about viability, I've always been impressed, and I know that Raúl also has inspiration in Maturana, but it's the idea of understanding a viable system, a system that develops recurrent patterns of interaction. And then when you talk about distinctions, that reveals a regularity in our experience and obscures others, I think that this is very illuminating in terms of trying to understand these regularities in the interactions between different roles in organizations. That is part of what we try to do with the VSM. So I can see a connection there that I find it really interesting. Just a comment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That helps for me, I think.
Okay.
So now I'm going to go back to the question. What do we do when we do language? What is this? And
Sorry,
this is
can I ask you, Pille, can I ask you something? What do you mean by chunking?
It is why I chose the word chunking is that we distinguish a regularity, and then we make of that, we start accreting other nuances to it, so that we it becomes the center of gravity for how we think about those words and those ideas. So in other words, our experience becomes discontinuous, that we tend to think we're happy, we're sad, and the whole variety in between. Or when we start naming medical distinctions, we lose the variety as we chunk the possibilities to fit the words. Does that satisfy?
Yeah, well, as you know, that's a word I used in my paper that you read with such care. So I was wondering whether there was a connection.
I'm sorry, I can't see you, so I don't know who's speaking.
Oh, Raúl Espejo.
Oh, Raúl, yes, yes. Okay. So did we use it similarly?
I used the word chunking in the paper that you reviewed, so I was wondering whether there was a connection.
I think so, yes, but every word can be used, as I'll come to later. You have to listen for the domain in which what the other somebody uses the word to know what they meant by it. So when you ask me, what do I mean by it? I explain it. And I can't at this moment remember the details of how you use it in your paper. So another of the, was that adequate, Raoul?
Sorry, no, that's not Raoul, no.
Oh, I thought that's what I heard. Then I made a mistake.
No, I was asking you, I am Raoul, and I am asking you about the word chunk.
Yes, yes. So was my answer adequate for you right now? That's what I am asking.
Yeah, well, yes, it does. I
Okay.
think clearly,
Okay,
yes.
well, we'll carry on then. Okay, back to this other very relevant little phrase from Maturana. What do I do when I do what I do? And I know there are people here who have made use of that. Like, for example, Ray Eisen has taken that concept a long ways. So what do we do when we do languaging? And briefly, we can say that languaging arises as a recursion in consensual coordination. So we are born and develop embedded in language. And this moves us from generation to generation. There's that little boy that's being walked and carried on left and right is now the grown-up man with his own son, my grandson. So we do this from generation to generation, and it happens so invisibly that we don't see what we're embedded in. We often just take language for granted and think that what we're talking about with language is what is. So consensual coordination. A lot of people get confused with this notion. They think that consensual means giving consent. No, it is sensing together. So we see it in birds flying there. They've sensed each other and sensed the medium at the same time, and they're coordinated in this. We see that in people, they don't have to consent to you go left, I go right, as where they're crossing a busy street. People don't bump into each other. They just consensually coordinate and carry on with their conversations, not even noticing it. So it's something we continue doing. And if there's a particular consensual coordination that happens over and over again, it becomes discerned as a pattern. It becomes recognizable as something. And then when it's that, you can coordinate that coordination. You can create a token that kind of represents that coordination. That token could be a gesture, it could be a sound, we might call it a word, but it just helps to coordinate that particular coordination. It's often the beginning of the action, like getting up is a token where it's time to get up. And this happens easily with them. For example, my dog playing with the stick. Playing with the stick becomes the coordination for the game. And it doesn't actually have to be a stick. It could be any throwable object. It's the same coordination. She hasn't named the stick, but it works as a coordination. And when you keep repeating these, it happens with increasing ease. It becomes a kind of a whole pattern. The coordination, the stick. If I was not screen sharing, I could show you my little dog sitting behind me now and tell her, let's go play ball. And she would prick up and we're ready to go. But eventually this token persists as present, and it can become the possibility for new coordination, a consensual coordination of the token. And this is something that is special. We do it as a mental step away from the original referent. We create a named object. When we do this, we are distinguishing and naming, which has buried in it all these things, but in practice, it's just a named object, a thing, an action idea. These are the things we start to take for granted in language as what they have enabled, not aware of what they have already constrained. But this is a wonderful step. This step enables us to refer to something outside the original context. It's no longer about, let's go play ball, which means that actually starting the action. It allows us to tell stories. We can tell what already did, what we did yesterday. We can tell imaginatories what we could maybe do. We can make plans. So this is where language has taken us. A consensual coordination of consensual coordinations of consensual coordination and further recursions on top of that. Because what happened is any distinction coordinates, they place the grounds for a proliferation. So a distinction can lead to a whole array of new distinctions as they're used differently becomes possibilities. And we have a new names result. And then what we often do is we take a distinction and transport it to a different domain of doings. Recursion in physics is taken to mean something in behavior. Or autopoiesis is moved in from the domain of chemical interactions or in the living system to molecular interactions, to what happens in societies. And as it moves, it changes. It's a new word, new idea. And each of these become a seed for new lineage. So words proliferate, and that what's buried in them, what created them, it's kind of lost over time. I love to look up at etymological dictionaries to see where some of these words come from. Process or history is lost as the name is accepted in the news. I never realized that being resilient comes resiliere, jump back, and it was originally coined as reneging on a loan. And it's not how we use it at all today. Resilience has a completely different meaning. But here's an interesting circularity. The distinctions we accept in culture, of course, determine how people see and how they act, which determines the kind of cultural world that we get. Well, which validates the distinctions. They fit because that's what we did. So clearly, this is the way it is. So the language that we use validates the language because it makes sense. And this influences our experiences and the possibilities for experience. Think example, what we do with a child who does just first time baking pancakes. Good job. You made a lovely job of those pancakes. Whereas in Estonian, I would not be talking about the pancakes. I'd be talking, tubli, boys. And the difference is that in one case, I'm referring to the tangible result. In the other case, I'm referring my attentions on the manner of being. And tubli, I haven't explained, is kind of a delight in competence. Delight in one's own competence, or as you watch, you have delight in the other having delight in their competence. That's the best way I can bring it into English. So what a difference that makes to how you view it. And here's an indulgence. Yesterday was my granddaughter's 10th birthday, so I videotaped her coming out of the house saying, I am tubli. And this has altered basically how I act with my grandchildren by incorporating at least into the culture the concepts that I learned that I find are useful in another language. But the question that here is, what are the implications for the viability of cultures in what the distinctions that that culture has tended to use? And English, I find, tends to have more reference to solid objects, to things, and there's a tendency for thingifying things in English that I find stronger than either Spanish, German, or maybe German is like it, but French, because English has become a language of commerce, and it's easier to, that's been part of its path of making a clarity in things, and therefore that's what happens. And what does that mean? So pause again before I get into deeper water. Okay, nobody's speaking up. Anybody still there?
Yeah.
It's so
First
funny when I don't see you.
Do you want another stop? Do you want comments now?
Only if people want.
Because there was a Gerald Cruz was wanting to make a comment. I don't know, Gerald, if you still want to make your comment.
Please, if you feel like it.
Okay, yes, I want to come back to the chunking problem. To me, I'm a compiler man, woman, and person. We're all tokenizer. I think that's a similar concept. Look at the Egyptian language. Initially, it wasn't clear whether one character or a whole sequence of characters was one word, and then several items or what together. That's a meaning, and that helps that.
Gerald, you broke up
Just
too
as a
much for me.
conclusion, when all asked about that's for yeah.
Eh, the-
Sorry,
the- your signal is very bad, Gerald, so we couldn't
sorry,
understand.
so I couldn't get it.
Sorry, I can't.
Oh,
I
okay. So
could not
well,
hear.
I just
Maybe later we can follow through.
Yeah, or if you put it in the chat, perhaps Pille can comment on that later on.
I can't read the chat. My eyes aren't good enough, so I'll ask somebody to read it for me.
I'll read it
Okay.
for you. I'll read it for you. Don't worry.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So,
So,
just put it in the chat, Gerald, and we'll do the question when we have it. Okay. We have only also one comment from John Lee. John.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Pille. You did give this talk at ISSS 4 years ago, and I recognize some of the graphics, and it's really wonderful. The one point I want to make now is the difference between digital and analog. And we have a tendency as Western thinkers to go from analog to digital reality,
yes,
where, for example, with the Chinese language, which is constructed with ideas and pictures, they tend to look at real things and then use the words to build. I don't even know if they can call them words.
yeah.
I know
Yeah.
I lived in Japan when I was a little boy, so I know a tiny bit of Japanese. And I think Asian people think very differently than Western thinkers do. And we're having a convergence of the two now. And this conversation is an example of anthropologists in Western thinking being able to integrate the thinking that non-Western thinkers have. And
Yeah.
so that's the only point I want to make. Thank you.
I have the wonderful advantage that my native language is not Indo-European, so it's a little different. And I spoke to a Chinese student and got her perspective on this, and they don't make distinctions as much in the way of behavior for consequence. I mean, as we do in English, or that I like the doubly, the idea. She said most of our qualitative distinctions of how we relate is about how we relate to each other. It's how the quality of the relationship between humans, rather than relationship between us and our doings, which I found interesting too.
I only know 2 words in Mandarin. One of them is hello, ni hao, but the other one is guanxi, which means relations. And I think for them, the interpersonal relations is much more important than whatever it is that they're talking about.
Yes.
So they have a very different balance within their social dynamic than how Western thinkers operate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's part of what I'm getting at, is that it is the language that we're embedded in that we take for granted that creates completely differences in how we progress as cultures. And there's because each language enables some ways of being and obscures others. But even within a language, there's some flexibility of meaning, and I'll continue on with that. When we create a distinction, give it a name, it kind of creates nuances within itself in different situations. That develops multiple meanings. And I'm going to turn this on the side, so look at it kind of end on. So at any one point in time, you can have a word that differs in its meaning depending on situation, context, and domain, and the history of the relations that goes into it. So that one word can have multiple meanings and multiple paths of divergence of moving on from it. Here I am using the word meaning in a way of speaking of the adjacent possibility in behavior and consequence. So we could look at various words such as, oh, I went ahead of myself. Any particular one of these meanings has a possibility of going in a direction, but any one conversation will take a path, and a different meaning has a different direction of paths. And again, in any one conversation, it's going to take one path, depending on how the interaction goes. So the word system can be heard differently in different conversations. Similarly, the word system's thinking, different people mean, as I listen to how they mean it, they mean different things. Viability. And one I got lost in recently is the word recursion. And I'm going to attempt to look at the different ways that's used. So again, going back to one of Maturana's statements, listen for the domain in which what the other said is valid. Not that one, not that one. Maybe that, oh no, not that one either. No, this one. And then as you follow it, you can see where that conversation goes. It becomes a viable conversation. But here, I've offered you an explanation. Then if you accept this, it influences how we see and act, which determines the world. So what explanations do we accept as appropriate, and do they become closed loops too? And so, better be careful here. But I'd like to think of this not as so much as an explanation, but I intend it as a poiesis of reflection using a visual metaphor. Metaphors. Well, we all know what they are. We say, oh, that kite is like a swallow in the sky. We take something from what the swallow does, attributing something from one domain to another. But we're not likely to say, that swallow is flying like a kite in the sky. The kite is much more constrained. It's a freedom, sense of freedom we impute from the swallow to the kite, but we can't do it. It's not commutative. An isophore, on the other hand, and this is a word that Maturana, I think, originally coined with Kathleen Forsyth, but is now also used by many others, Ray Eisen in particular, as I know, when he has this juggling metaphor, that this is an isophore. Now, juggling his various aspects of managing a system is like juggling balls. But I could also say, oh, I'm trying to juggle balls. It feels like when I was trying to manage different things on my computer at the same time. When I drop one, the others I get all mixed up. So you can say it both ways. It's something that applies to both domains. So it's kind of commutative. There is this adequate sameness that you don't get confused what the metaphor is meant to imply. But here I'm going to use a metaphor, saying that we are like chefs with words, that composing with language, the result of what we get depends on more than the ingredients. It's how we compose them, how we do what we do. So different chefs using the same ingredients get different results. And I mean this as a metaphor to remind us that how we do what we do does matter. Another metaphor I'd like to bring is a metaphor of flow, because small divergences at one point can have a large consequence downstream. Indeed, I can think of words acting like maybe pebbles or other constructions that direct the flow. And of course, the flow can erode them and move them and shift them over time. But that part of the metaphor, though appropriate, I don't have to develop here. So you can have a bunch of words and have all the right words there, but if they're not properly arranged, the meaning, the flow of the meaning goes all divergent. So we organize the words to coordinate our meaning. Ah, that's better. Now we get most of the meaning across, but the small changes have a consequence. The way we start this conversation, the first few words we say, may make a whole difference to how clearly the rest of it proceeds. So in a conversation, here's two fellows talking together, my husband with his friend, and what he's saying mostly gets across, but there's unclarity. So they discuss this word, rearrange it, bring it into the conversation. And now that you've reconfigured that word, the flow of the conversation is more unified. But he's talking to same husband talking to his mother-in-law in Germany, where that word simply doesn't have the same meaning. And no matter how you rotate it, you can't get it to fit. So this is where sometimes we have problems with translation in different languages. But we think of language as a flow of recursive and recurrent recursive coordinations of coordination within a context and viable outcomes. I think most often with us depend on viable conversations. That I think I have taken as my own learning from trying to think about viability here. So pause again.
Thank you, Bill. I would like to ask a question. How would you define a viable conversation?
Please, I haven't yet. Definitely, actually, defining things I'll come to in this coming section, because defining is sometimes a way of narrowing the meaning to give us a particular one, but in a way that also obscures the other possible meanings that we would like to have of it. So when I define it, I would show you how I use it, but that might not mean that that is the best usage of it. I remember dictionaries were created out of people seeing what others were saying, not out of some basic, this is what the word means. It's looking at how is it used. So we know words have multiple meanings. Any other questions now? Before that, I've deflected that one.
I cannot see any hands up.
Okay. Systemic cognition. I come back to this touchstone of mine. I actually keep this on my desk because it has meaning for me beyond what it appears to be. So living system, an autopoietic system, is composing itself, but it's also acting in a relational domain and sensing in that domain. And the ecosocial domain is a medium. And as it's active now, it changes. And the living system makes the circularity of it by sensory effector coordination in the cognitive domain. So that closes a loop. The loop's closed both by the medium and the living system. And remember, the medium can very well be other living systems or just one other living system. So I made it generalized here. So living systems are cognitive systems because of this sensory effector coordination. That's true for bacteria and algae and paramecia, as well as frogs and lizards and apes and us. And this happens in a continuous flow. Living happens in a continual relational flow. I use a metaphor of a river in the background, and maybe gets boring, but viability also happens in a continuous relational flow. Living in viability, via, after all, means life somehow. And this is what this connection between the medium and the living system is thought of structure, but Maturana's terms is structural coupling. And that means that each element can only do that which its structure enables it to do, and we cannot force any particular change that we would like. We can invite something that the structure enables. And all of this together, including the changes in the medium, is an adaptation. Adaptation is one of a relationship, not only of the system itself. It's not applying only to the thing that adapts to, everything is adapting together. Now I want to go inside this living system, that's why I've enlarged it a bit. And think of it as us. We live in language and rational thinking. I'm speaking in language now. You're thinking in language. It's what we're doing. But we also have systemic cognition, a deeper, wider way of thinking that our whole nervous system is participating all the time, whether or not we're aware of it. And it is in recursion, in structural coupling with language and rational thinking. In other words, our language will alter our systemic cognition, and our systemic cognition offers meaning to the language, creates, influences our languaging. And there's also bodyhood. And our bodyhood is in circularity with our systemic cognition. So maybe you could say systemic is body-wide as well, not just nervous system-wide. But this is an internal systemic that is in resonance with the entire external systemic, and it develops that way in a growing organism, and more importantly, it has evolved that way. We have the gift of a long history of coherence, of viability in the evolution of ourselves. So cognition is a systemic dynamic that evolved congruently with the complex relational dynamic that's embedded in. And I could think of this as hyperdimensional or adimensional. It's trying to express in language what I mean by systemic cognition is better left kind of loose, because once I make it too tight in language, it's no longer there. You kind of have to grok it. But the other aspect of this that's important to note is that we are in relationship with multiple others. And those multiple others are also in relationship with more multiple others. And this is not just others of human being, which as I've shown with these language in those pictures, but other living systems and the medium. And so it's embedded in the complex relational embedded in the systemic flow of relational embeddedness. What I could also say is the language moderates our relations in the flow of structural coupling with our ourselves, our ecosocial mediums, and inside ourselves, all the way down. So it's the systemic structural coupling is non-hierarchical, I could say, that it is happening simultaneously in every level that we could distinguish as a hierarchy. You can't say it's hierarchy because nothing's higher than the other. They're continuous, systemic. Another pause before and I'm probably getting close to the end of time here too. No? Okay. Should I carry on?
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay. Text and context. I've separated con and text on purpose, as you'll see why. So the systemic cognition that I've referred to, I can think of it as a broad, generalized thing. And it's referred to, other people refer to, Eisen thinks something similar at least, as systemic sensibility and felt sense in Midgley and Lilly. I think they're referring to the same kind of thing, but I'll keep to my term for now. It enables a richness of systemic coherence that may be in some sense almost invisible to us because it's not in language. It does include sensual and consensual coordination, which happens without explicit necessary awareness, reflective thought. But it doesn't bound the potential response necessarily. The thinking developed neural language gives us more precision of how we coordinate with each other, but may reduce the richness of the possibility. It's a constraint in one direction as it enables another direction. And this is a coordination of coordinations, distinguishing and naming, and all those other recursions I talked about. But then we do this, and this is, of course, in recursion with the systemic cognition, as I mentioned in the previous figure. Then we have thinking that's based on text, symbols, abstractions, formalized procedures, and models. That it's the formalization. This is what you were asking me for when I was asking me, what do I mean by viable? Can I define it? Yes, I could define it. It would be formalizing it in some sense. And this formalization provides precision and certainty. enables us to work with rules of logic. And it is in a structural coupling with our oral language. Now I'm going to just turn these into colors so I can refer to them a little bit better and put some axes on them. So I'm looking at increased richness of systemic coherence, or building a potential bounding of the potential response. And so one is direction that offers a capacity of coordination among multiple domains, another capacity of reliability and management. But square things, that things don't really happen with square. Let's try and make these the probability distributions or distributions in general. And that seems more appropriate. Okay. And in fact, I put this already in the published paper. And then I got thinking about, now I see, well, just a minute. I have taken that notion, and it is actually a notion within the formalized structure. So have I lost the systemic aspect of it in trying to create a figure that looks precise? I formalized an aspect of what I thought of as systemic understanding. What have I obscured with making these distinctions? That's not clearly visible even now. So I have to be careful. Am I caught in hubris? Or are we caught in hubris with our beliefs when we formulate any of our system science? Probably not if we think back on how do we do what we do. So let's take this figure again and diagram as an isophore to poke a poison of meaning and recognize there's a rich, dynamic, and fractal, scintillating medium that we operate in, that our systemic cognition is in structural coupling with. And this is an evolved, viable relationship. We have our long history of being a living system that depends on this. So this systemic cognition, we have developed our oral language out of it. It's a viable development of oral language that's coherent with our systemic cognition. And sometimes we have these glimpses of an idea that only when it comes into our oral language can we really see it, because we can hold it there. I can think of this as a kind of a peripheral vision that we see in our systemic cognition, and then, now we see it, so we can name it. And this is ephemeral in a sense. It's constantly changing. It doesn't have a stability. But when we put it in language, it is socially conserved. It becomes a culturally conserved thing. Then we formalize it and put it in written language. It's even more durable, because now it's externally conserved in texts. So we can have all of this, the richness and the bounding, the text, and here, the context with the text. Look how much comes with the text. There's the majority of what I think we deal with depends on the context of many conversations and the almost invisible yet sensed systemic sensing, systemic cognition. We can think of this as emergence and entanglement, which is how I thought about it for the ISS conference. One of the things that we can get into trouble with is take the formalizations too seriously and get talking about it. So our conversations are kind of angels, how many angels can dance in a pin form, and we lose connection with our systemic coherence. But I think we don't do that. I think we're more likely to take a notions and consider the viability through a fluid navigation in time that we coordinate through our shifting attention. Another way I could have thought of this as the viability as the shifting of ideas, but maybe also we understand viable differently, whether we sense it, how we talk about it in conversation, and how we try and define it. What do we mean by viable? Which domain? What kind of thinking are we referring to? I'm almost at the end here, so I'm going to suggest let's carry on, then we'll carry back to questions.
Yep.
So swimming in these ideas, finally, we're thinking that language modulates are consensual coordinations of living together. So what we think of as meaning arises as a reflective experience in the flow of our living when we sense a harmony among relationships. A flow of language evokes a flow among relationships, and a flow among relationships evokes a flow of language. Another nicer way, possibly, of putting this is meaning is a relationship to relationship. This was a phrase coined by Alexander Kravchenko, who lives in Irkutsk in Siberia, and this is a picture of where he's from. So, depending on where on the land we live, we have different ways of engaging with our culture. So indeed, different cultures develop different conversations depending on how they're engaged. And possibly there's more overlap than I've shown here. But we could also think about these as different fields: economics, science, biology, engineering, and each develops its set of conversations in language. Or we could think of these as the various domains of different kinds of systems thinking, and each one develops its own metaphors and theories and formalizations, conceptual frameworks and models. If we take any couple of these, and these could be any of the ones from system science, from critical systems, heuristics, systems dynamics, and you're all familiar with these. And if we try and look at one of these in terms of the other and try and express it, we're kind of trying to bend it into shape, out of shape. So let's not do that. Let's instead expand the conversations around them and have conversations for viability among the different fields or threads of how we relate in systems, and think about how we do when we do what we do. It's those conversations that I think are relevant. So I would conjecture that whether we viably integrate our various forms of thinking depends on how we do it. We have a choice in how we do what we do, and we can live viable, systemic, relational manner, engage in conversations, as well as benefit from our conceptual and formal models and frameworks. We have a choice in how we do what we do, how we do that engagement and conversation, as well as using the formalizations. So in conclusion, I would like us human beings to remain the kind of beings who live in reflexive awareness or the embeddedness through text, oral language, and our systemic cognition, thus generating viable systems as a simple consequence of being that way. Thank you, and I welcome conversation.
Thank you, Pille. Absolutely wonderful.
I will stop share. So then I will see you again.
Thank you very much.
There you are.
Okay, so who would like to start the conversation? Richard?
Yes. Hi. That was really interesting and incredibly thought-provoking. And I'm sorry for
good.
dumping thoughts into the chat line, but that's the best way for me to do it. As colleagues here who know me know, I've become absolutely almost obsessed with how the world of large language model AIs has been developing so rapidly over the past year. The genie's out of the bottle and stuff is happening, and I was just getting some very interesting resonances here between what you were saying and what my limited understanding of what actually goes on inside the guts of large language model simulations or embodiments or whatever you would like to call it of the language. And the first one, my comment was I wonder how large language models based on different languages like Estonian as opposed to English, which tends to be the dominant one, might respond to something like the same prompts. You prompt it, you fire in a confection of words known as the prompt, and something pops out the other end. Now, there's always danger of not doing the translation of the prompt accurately. But wouldn't it be interesting just to see what the characteristics of these semantic embeddings of the different language result in if you fire the same prompts, and it leads into all sorts of analogous metaphorical thinkings about, you know, what happens if you allow the mergings between languages to be like what they call it, sensor fusion. In the world of sensing the world using electronics, you sometimes get a lot more out if you combine the nature of the different sensors than you do if you just use one sensor, because they're looking at it from slightly different perspectives. That's the kind of thinking. Oh, and by the way, I put in a reference there to David Bohm and his fascination with the Rio mode as a more appropriate language for describing quantum mechanical processes. Think if you have languages which are more than just a comparison between English and the Rio mode. By the way, I think the Blackfoot to Indians tend to use the process language. So what would happen if you start to confuse multiple languages within this new technology? That's the burden of where I think I was going. Sorry, brain dump time.
Oh, no, that's lovely. I got a lot of, I got gifts from your dump. And of course, that notion of the prompts being able to translate them properly, how can one do that when one is not native to both languages, and if those concepts simply don't exist, especially the soft ones? You can the glass is going to be the same in each language, is tangible, but how you use it and the gestures you would do with it would be just different. One of the things I notice as differences between Estonian and English, I see another bunch of hands, but is that Estonian is a relational language, and that always nouns are spoken as how they are related to each other. We would, in analysis, we'd call them 16 declensions of each noun, which meaning the noun that's being approached versus the one that's being withdrawn from, under it or over it or in it or out of it. The word itself, the object changes in relationship. Now is somebody else going to?
Yes, I think David is waiting, and then Bernhard.
Yes, thank you, Ella. That was fascinating. I was thinking of what you were saying in terms of the sense making in organizations, because if you're intervening in an organization or if you're investigating an organization, you have to make sense of what people are telling you. And of course, within the organization, individuals have to make sense of what other people are telling them within their various consensual domains. So you have two levels or multiple levels of sense making going on in any intervention, which can be quite challenging. Now, in looking at that, I'm just wondering whether you've ever looked at the whole idea of a discourse. In social construction theory, people talk about discourses in which there is a particular structured conversational set going on within one area or subsystem, which actually has an impact on the way people make meanings out of things, and often make conflicting meanings out of things, or meanings that they don't accept, because there's differences in power, for example, between members of the organization. I wonder how that fits into your model, where you would put that, how you would see that in terms of your model.
I don't think I have an explicit understanding of discourse theory, but what I do have noticed very clearly is that where the framework that is going to be used for conversation is fairly open, like open table, like in the integration, it's got open conversation for a while that allows people to expand on what they mean and tell stories. Stories always come with more context than definitions. And so it seems to be where that is allowed into the framework as part of the process, it seems to end up with the less conflict in the longer term. And discourse, I always think of dis or dia. Die means through, not it's not a negative, it's a going through the course.
Can I give an example? Did you ever follow the Dilbert cartoon?
Can't remember. I've seen it,
Dilbert,
a few of
the
them. Yeah,
Dilbert
but I
cartoon was a classic example of a discourse, of a very powerful discourse, which all the language makes sense in terms of what was good for Dilbert. What was good for him. That was Dilbert ran the organization basically, and I call that the Dilbert discourse. Actually, there are
okay.
many others. It's a way of describing a set of conversations in terms of the relationship between the people within the conversational set. So the Dilbert one, I just use an illustration, but I won't push the point. I'm just saying it might be another way of interpreting what you're saying. That's all.
But
But
you have
thank you. I
just
found
made,
it interesting.
but you have just made a beautiful point in how you use the cartoon to expand the conversation so that we all have the same context for that conversation. You've just made your own point with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David. We have Bernard.
Yes, thank you. I find it very fascinating what you talked, especially because you were talking about a topic in language that was new to me, but about a topic that I'm quite obsessed with for a long time. I'd have 2 points, but I think I might only one here, and which is about, well, you were talking most about it when you were talking about the systemic cognition, and a little bit before that, what we do when we language. I love this use of language as the verb. Maybe you know that in the work of Terry Pratchett, stories are actually a life form, a parasitical life form that live on society and have the purpose of making themselves come true. And I think this is very nice and fun and everything, but it is also very true. And when we look at words and stories in a slightly different circle from what you said, but a circle where the words form in a way perception, and already thinking that first we perceive and then we characterize things and categorize is already a choice of looking at it. And maybe you can look at it in a different way, because the interest of what we perceive, where we focus and what we ignore, is as much dominated by the words and how we order thoughts and perceptions than by what we have in front of us. And if we go on, then that means the interpretation of it, and as a consequence also our action, our response to it, is also as much shaped by the words as it is by the objects in front of us. Now, I find this particularly interesting when the object in front of us is society and other people. Because then our interaction with other people, you could also look at it in a way. Your description was like of systemic cognition, to me, was like one version, a more optimistic outlook. In a more pessimistic outlook, you could say, in what sense do we constantly have confirmation bias simply by using language? We perceive what we expect to perceive and what we want to perceive. And I think, if you take this on a really grand scale, one of the most blatant examples at the moment, you could look at it at, all these teenagers who are at the moment transitioning their gender and being non-binary and so on. Well, was it really so that gender was a socially constructed thing, and then people like Judith Butler discovered that? Or to what extent is the fact that their description of gender as something socially constructed became successful for many other reasons, because it was revolutionary, because it appealed to feminists at the time, and so on. And its success was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, made sure that since people started looking at the reality through these lenses, they started, sorting themselves in different lenses, and then they behaved in a way which confirmed the theory. Now, I was wondering whether you can build on that. How this kind of connects to what you.
Well, it comes close to something that I've thought about a fair bit. Estonian, my language, is non-gendered. I cannot say he came in the door, she came in the door. It doesn't exist in the language. And so I was, and then I first came to Canada, quite I was invisible. I'm transparent to any gender distinctions being made. So I've been noticing that, and I was really annoyed with feminism because it, for me, created a distinction that didn't need to be there. But I could be empathize too with the situation people were in. So I've become sensitive to this issue of genderization. And I think, but all in all, what I would like to say about your comments is that you have articulated the words better than I was able to articulate my words. Maybe I was trying to point to some of these things in my pictures, but you're more articulate than I am.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Pille. We have Ian Kendrick.
Thanks, Angela. Pille, what a wonderful presentation. The content has fascinated me. It's very close to my heart. I want to just ask you a question, but before I do that, I need to give you a very short summary. About 5 years ago, I was working with an entity in the music world called Pono, P-O-N-O, which is an Hawaiian word. And the founder used that word almost to honor the Hawaiian culture. That's what they were trying to do by using that word. I was in a meeting, and it happened that in the meeting was the chair of the Hawaiian Board of Ethics. And I got a very, very, very stern look when I mentioned the word Pono. And I had to ask and persuade her to spend some time to me explaining why I got that look. And she said, "Do you know what Pono means?" I knew what I'd been told from the English person or the American person actually that had chosen the name. It was completely wrong. And they were grossly offended by the use of this word in the context of a commercial organization. There was no understanding whatsoever of the cultural meaning of the word. It turns out to be one of the most important words in Hawaiian. We ended up spending the afternoon together, and she told me the true meaning of the word aloha. It took her 1.5 hours to explain what aloha actually means. And I kept replaying it back and said, "No, you haven't got it yet. I'll try again." "No, now you've got it," she said. And in the end, she actually gave me permission to say aloha. And the whole concept of cultural appropriation of language, of using language. English has absorbed so many words of language for centuries. There's no language it hasn't taken something from, okay? I was wondering about your reflection on that notion of cultural appropriation of language, using it inappropriately, and thereby grossly offending the people from whom the language came, without the users realizing the offense that has happened.
That is a difficult one, because the good side of it would be expanding our understanding, but that takes an understanding of like an hour and a half to explain a word, and we usually don't give it that kind of time, or living in the culture. Like I brought out three words that you probably never heard before from Estonian, and I don't think you really understand any of them, but you understand that there is another word for another concept, that it has a difference in meaning. And there is an arrogance in assuming that you know the word through just taking it. And no, I've worried about us human beings speciating to become Homo sapien arrogans. It's a hubris we're susceptible to.
Yeah, I ended up withdrawing from the organization because the founder would not appreciate the argument. I just said I can't be part of this because of that. Yeah.
Yes, we end up having to follow our own sense of ethics.
Yeah.
An aesthetic of ethics.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pille. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Ian. We have Carlos.
Hello, and thank you, Pille, for your awesome presentation.
By the way, I'm not a pill. I'm Pille. Pille. Okay. Okay. I know everybody's been saying it, but you are not you. I just realized that.
Yeah, thank you. So no, I just want to thank you for the awesome presentation. I love the way you explain logical typing and learning levels of Bateson in another way. I love how cybernetics can explain the same thing in so many ways. And I feel inspired because I try to explain this myself. And I try to build models for explaining it, and your model will just serve a lot in that path. And I would like to add to your presentation and suggest a video that I recently saw. It's called "If Everything is a Remix," and it talks about pop culture and how we just remix all things with our personal touch and create art or new expressions. And it has to do with this subject, and I like it. And also add that Bateson concludes his last books with saying that we are a self-healing tautology. I think this is where this is all going, and because we can now speak of these subjects and understand them and expand our cohesion together, right, through this all communications. But anyway, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. And this remix idea, it applies in daily life. Everything we say is a remix of the words we have to speak it with. And it is the way we mix them, the composition that we create. It's a creative act to bring forth something to say. If we're not just copying.
And you just mentioned, you just said it's a creative act, which is another book that I will suggest. That it's by Rick Rubin, a music producer, that he speaks of that in a very art form, or like almost a Zen master of arts, and he speaks of just creating out of flow of being a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Elena.
Thank you, Pille. A lovely presentation. I wanted to ask you about a question that I've been interested in for a long time, is how do you manage to, I suppose, adjudicate or compromise and come to an agreement when people are using the same words in a particular context to mean very different things? I got into that by trying to understand the regulatory process of the U.S. government, which I think on reflection probably was designed not to work. But how can one approach that except through, getting people together for a bunch of hours in something like a integration, when you actually have the capability of ironing some of those differences out and coming to some kind of common agreement?
I have thought about that, Elena. And yes, I think the main approach is through continued conversation and the questions. How do you mean that? What do you mean by how, in this situation, how are you using that word? But that takes time. And I'm wondering about exploring whether one could create a matrix of any word, of what the various possible implications are, whether it's, I'm going to try doing that with the word recursion. So when I get there, maybe I'll bring it to you and see if that works. That is it something that is has to be, that is generated by itself? Does it have an emergent consequence? Does that consequence persist after you stop generating it? And there are sort of systems ways of looking at words that may enable you to distinguish them, but it would take a fair bit of thought for any one word and a bit of exploration to see in various contexts what are the common ways of usage of it. So I don't know if that would help in the situation, because it might just make it more complicated.
Well, I'd certainly like to look at that if you should send it to me.
Yes, when I do it, maybe I'll sit down with you at the next conference and work on it.
Okay.
Thank you, Elena. Gerald. You are muted, Gerald.
I had to be the one to do that, didn't I? So yeah, it's a question about how language relates to power and identity. because I'm thinking about living in New Zealand for 7 years and how Maori language gradually became part of the English language. So there are words like kaupapa, which means, well, you can't say exactly what it means in English. It kind of means agenda. It kind of means vocation. It kind of means a pathway for action, collective action. And so words like that became normalized. And then I went back last year and it had become much more richly infused with Maori terms. And then I had this shock very recently because the new government has been elected. And one of their pledges is to erase the Maori language from all signs in the society. And there's this reaction in favor of a European identity against Maori. And yeah, exactly. And it just occurred to me just how much the language was changing the culture and how that just created power relationships and identity dynamics. And I wondered if you had any kind of reflections on that.
Well, English is a language that has a fair bit of power dynamics in it. So I guess it would be a confrontation to bring I don't know the Maori language, whether the word you chose to talk about wasn't a word with high degree of ambiguity that's very context sensitive. And that's something I favor, is being able to have ambiguity such that you are responsible for the appropriate move in that context, which gives is not power. It's power is again another English word that is in Estonia. I don't have a word that is power quite. I have something that's more like energy. So what do you give energy to? And power is a social construct, I think. And so when you're losing that Maori influence, which sounded to me like an enrichment for a conversation, you're trying to put a power move over it. And I don't see how to stop something like that. It's maybe they only stop things big changes seem to happen, as Margaret Mead said, in small groups that expand, and maybe there are various nuclei that then connect. Sorry, Gerald, I do not have a solution, but I'm happy to see you here.
Yeah, no, I didn't expect you to have a solution, but it's an interesting reflection.
It's a complex one, and requires a great deal of responsibility to think about it clearly.
Okay, thank you, Gerald. Raúl. You're muted, Raúl. You're muted. Raúl, yeah, that's good.
Bill, just getting a little bit out of the general direction of the questions you have had. I'm wondering about Maturana and objectivity in parentheses and objectivity without parentheses, and saying how does that relate to constitution and the constitution of reality or the transcendental reality that we normally deal with. It would be helpful for me if you could clarify the connection between the different aspects of language that you have discussed in this conversation with these points I have just made.
Yes, thank you. And I feel a very strong connection there. I think that when we accept language as it's given to us, we live in it, there's a very easy path to taking it as the reality and taking it on the ontological path of this is reality and we can refer to an external. But when you have the opportunity for living in more than one language, you get the possibility of questioning the reality because they are different. And so rather than trying to discern is one right or wrong, having the solution of a constitutive ontology that creates multiple a multiverse of realities. These are different realities in different languages, and not only different languages as in formal lingua, but the way we use it in smaller groups, and I mean, my family uses of some words are different than other families' uses. So but you recognize it is just how we coordinate. It is not anything to do with reality, but to do with how we are operating together. So the question comes, what is an appropriate way to operate together? When I used to present that ontological diagram when I was teaching, one of the things I would like to always make clear is that if you happen to believe, for example, a strong Christian believer, it does not, I don't want to efface that. That is a clear reality that guides your behavior in an ethical way. And that's what's important, is how you act in the world, rather than how you create the framework that enables that action. So that goes also back to the question that Gerald had. What if the framework enables a power relationship that is disenfranchising a number of people? That is a framework I would choose to try and dissolve, to have people recognize it is not a reality, but there are multiple realities, and you can choose. You have a choice. Does that help you?
Yes, very much, Pille. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul. John.
Yes, thank you. Pille, wonderful talk, and I just love these ideas. And when some of the questions are going, and I was reminded of an article I read many years ago in a wonderful magazine called Co-Evolution Quarterly, which I'm sure John Lee will remember well. And it was by a doctor who realized that a lot of the problems with his patients were psychosomatic. And he said, okay, I'm going to treat these patients by changing their vocabulary. And he said, don't use these words anymore. And he had a whole list of words that he felt put them into a victim mode and made them feel very unworthy, and gave them a whole new lot of words they had to use. And most of them got better. It was just the most wonderful case study how you can treat things with vocabulary. And I wondered if you had any particular words that you'd like society to drop altogether, and any new words which should come in which would deal with some of the multiple crises we've got.
I'd like to think about that. I mean, you've already had me try and bring some words into my family as they are useful, but I don't know what I would consider it. Yeah, how do you bring a meaning that requires an hour and a half of explanation to be in general usage in a culture that lives on tweets? It's how do you introduce a concept from another culture so that it impregnates the society and becomes general? I think it requires a lot of interdigitation of the cultures and acceptance and the liking. Intermarriage, I think, helps.
Yeah. I was also thinking about you mentioned grok earlier on, and in Heinlein's book, in The Stranger in a Strange Land,
yes,
there are some words which the Martian, who's the hero of the story, does use, which I found very interesting. But
well, that's where it came from.
yeah, it'd be nice to get to take this to a very a much more pragmatic approach, and say that maybe these are words we shouldn't use, and maybe these are words which would, I don't know. It's just
you
really
look to be old enough to be from. We have lived through the 1960s, and how easily we accept the new words in that era. It was a different time, and yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
We have Xian.
I think your mic needs to be turned on, Sean.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks very much. Thank you, Pille. I really enjoyed your talk. you may see from my name that I'm Irish and living in Ireland, and I'm an Irish speaker as well. And in Ireland, we've had a very, very, depending on your perspective, a very entangled approach to language. So the Irish language was essentially suppressed for several centuries. And then when eventually, after a revolution, or depending on an uprising, the Irish language became the first official language in Ireland. Even though at the moment, after almost 100 years, or more than 100 years of endeavoring to revive it, it's only spoken by a very small minority, even though most people actually understand the language to a certain extent. So you have this very unusual situation where a small minority of people would really understand and appreciate the kind of differences and nuances that you're talking about in the language. And there's a kind of an official expectation that you can just translate from one language into another. So you can have this direct translation. And I know Ireland is not, in any way unique from that point of view, because I think all the Baltic states may have had similar experiences. And you mentioned New Zealand was mentioned earlier on. And I just want to mention, I'd love your insight on that, or what you might say about the minority languages in countries. But I also want to mention that on Friday in Ireland, we have a referendum, or two referendums, two questions to change the constitution. And the two changes are about family and relationships that form a family. And also the other one is about care. And the Irish language is the first official language. So the referendum has got two versions of the same paragraphs, one in Irish and one in English. And the wording is very, very different in Irish to what it is in English for the same text and for the same question. And most people, except you would have the kind of insights that you're talking about, wouldn't really appreciate that. So the concept of family in the English language is very different to the concept of family in the Irish language. And yet, the state here would say that the primary language for interpretation legally is the Irish language. And that's just a sop to our independence, if you like, So I'd love your insights on any of those questions. So.
Well, it sounds like even though it is officially the primary language, it is probably taken in the English interpretation of that primary language. Because if I remember, Irish is not Indo-European either. It's Celtic, isn't it?
No, it's an Indo-European language.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we call ourselves Celtic, but it's kind of dubious that there were people here thousands of years before the Celts arrived.
Okay, so there's probably, but those people probably had an influence on the language then, because they, as arrivals were few at that time.
Indeed.
Yeah. So you have a very interesting situation indeed there, where there is an lack of awareness for the differences in meaning that are being expressed in the formal language, but enacted in a different language.
Indeed. And I go further because I really liked your talk about that, because these, you delve into cultural concepts and really rich different perspectives in the two languages, so which are borne out by behavior as well. And yet we live in English, but a lot of what we're coming from is coming from the old Celtic, if you like, traditions and the Irish language as well.
If I look at you speaking, I think I can almost see it in the difference, nuance of your body language has a different rhythm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I just to Angela, I'm really looking forward to going over some of the slides and listening to this talk again, because there were many profound ideas for me that I'd love to explore. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pille, is that okay to share your slides with the?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, I can send you the keynote if you want to have it as a PDF, for example.
I will do that. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, remind me.
Okay, yes. Last question from John Lee.
So the word that I'm focused on now is coevolution, that the environment in which you operate to a large extent determines the options and choices you have, and the degree to which you can respond appropriately determines your success.
And so that part of the environment we live in is our language and our cultural environment. It determines the co-evolution of language and ourselves.
Okay, well, I think that this will be the end of this. This has been absolutely extraordinary, Pille. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed this group. I hope if everybody's thoughts continue to be this rich in every presentation, maybe I could join you more often.
I think that you leave us with lots and lots of really interesting and important questions. Hopefully, we can continue this conversation somehow in the future. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for being with us. Next week, we have, I think that is still here or not? Andrew Pickering is, oh yes, here is Andrew. So Andrew is going to be our speaker next week. So very much looking forward to have you with us. Not next week.
I think next month, Angela. Not next week.
On the 4th of April. And I hope we're not going to make another mistake with the date. So yes, 4th of April, Wednesday, the 4th of April, 5 o'clock with Andrew Pickering. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Calendar says that that the 3rd is the Wednesday.
The calendar says, oh, well, thank you, Elena. I'm always making mistakes with the date. So Wednesday, the 3rd of April with Andrew Pickering. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pille. Thank you.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Speaking on Thursday.
Bye.
Thank you. Like, can I check the time?